We are. Hello. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. My name is Timothy Britton Catlin. I run the MST in architecture, and I'd like to introduce first of all Madeline and Will, who are currently in the second and first years, and are on hand to answer any questions about what it's like to be part of the course. With us, you can see as well Vanessa and Susanna, who are the course administrators and organisers. So let me just say a little bit about what this course is, what the history of it is, why we set it up, and what we were aiming to do. It's been running since 2020 as an apprenticeship course, as an apprenticeship part two. And what we wanted to do was to set up a completely different type of postgraduate architectural education. We wanted to have something that would go hand in hand with working in practice. So that means that we organized it essentially thematically. Our students from 2026 will do one residential module after the next, each one addressing a different area of architectural practice. The basic bones of the course are the way they always have been, which is to say that students will come to us for fortnight sessions, one at the beginning of September. I think it starts at the beginning of the second week of September this time, once in for a fortnight before Christmas, and again round about Easter, depending on exactly when the timing of their Easter is. So that's 30 days of quite intensive teaching and learning. We set in all of those modules, we set specific tasks, and everyone works in groups. And the result of that is the production in my opinion, my experience as a teacher, a staggeringly high level of work and of production. We move, for example, from brief preparation, precedent studies, to natural material innovation. That is a module that is taught together with researchers from the Department of Architecture who are active in that field. We have facade design. We have urban design and sustainable building. And for the third year of the course, everyone does their own individual design project, as well as the management practice and law aspects of the course. Now, this won't be of great interest to many people, but it will be important to some. This course is transitioning into the new ARB system. So that means that the management practice and law teaching, which was formerly part of the part three, moves into this course. And graduates from this course will then be able to sit the separate assessment, which will enable them to register as architects. We have a quite different attitude to architecture school teaching than is familiar in many places. We see everyone as being responsible adults who are able to study independently and to build on their work in between the residential sessions. The way it works roughly is like this. What happens is that at every residential session, you will meet a number of basic criteria as a group. So you'll learn, for example, how to do embodied carbon calculations, how to address structural questions, what are the main issues in urban design are, and so on. And the very first of these modules is a research methods module, which is one in which you will hear from active researchers in every possible aspect of that's related to architectural history. So that's not just the history, but it's also transport, infrastructure, sustainable design, the economics of building, and so on. And after all of these, you are then in a position to build on what you've just done before you come back again. The way in which we do that is we ask everybody to start to edit the work that they did in the residential session, to add to it, to respond to feedback, and to individualize it so that at the end of every year, you have a portfolio to a very high standard, which is presented to the external examiners. That's roughly speaking how it works. So one of the subjects which I'm sure will come up is how much time does this require between the residentials and how do you handle it? And I'm hoping that Maddie and Will be able to tell you about their own experience. We have a system whereby you will have an academic advisor who is in effect your supervisor, whom you can see every month, who will give you advice about how to develop your work after every residential module. So you're not on your own. In fact, in that respect, I would say it follows the tradition of Cambridge postgraduate courses, where you have someone you can turn to who is an expert, a specialist in your field, and can help you complete the work as you make your way through the process. Now, a final thing I'd like to say, perhaps at the very beginning, is that when we established this course, we established it as an apprenticeship, and the relationship with employers was a very important one. It's obviously slightly different now in that our contract will be directly with yourselves as students on the course, and where you are working and how you are working is not directly our concern. But nevertheless, what I'd like to emphasize is that the skills that you will pick up are directly applicable in the work that you are doing. This is a very important part of the course, and it always has been. So that's just a beginning of an introduction. We had a few questions at the start, and I thought I might just have a go at answering some of them. I'll read out what the questions say because there are various points that have been raised by several people in my conversations and in my correspondence with anyone who's shown an interest in what we're doing. So the first one goes as follows. We have a potential applicant who says that they have a computer science degree from the United States. Are they eligible for this course, or must they first complete a part one? The answer is you no longer need to have a part one accredited course in order to join this course. That's a fairly major legal change that's been made by the regulator. Now, what is obviously the case is that in order to join the course, you will be in competition with people who do have a first degree in architecture, and consequently, you need to show that you're able to, through your portfolio, I suppose is the best way of doing it, able to show that you can, for example, draw. That you can draw formally, that you can sketch, because it's drawing and sketching which form a very major part of this project. As a matter of fact, I see that somebody has already asked in the chat whether hand drawing is acceptable. The answer is yes, we encourage it. As it happens, the university's Department of Architecture has always, anyway, encouraged hand drawing. But what you'll find is that there are some aspects of this which do require some software, which might be a challenge for some, but I think not impossibly, because we find, I mean, Nadia and will know better than me by now, but we find that about probably only about a third to a half of the members of the course can already, for example, operate Rhino, and even fewer Grasshopper and so on. Now, these come up, as do various software systems for addressing sustainability, the different aspects of sustainable design. But we think that that's doable for anybody, certainly who's got Maths A level or the equivalent. It's not harder than Maths A level, and it's a good deal easier for most of the case. But drawing is important. So if you come in without an architecture degree, what we'd like to see is some evidence that you'll be able to cope in a course where drawing happens pretty much continuously for a whole fortnight. Now, perhaps I could go on to some of the questions that have just been raised in the chat. The first one reads, if it's no longer an apprenticeship, how will practice-based learning support our coursework outside of residential periods? Well, there's going to be I see that Vanessa is going to say a word about that. No, she's not. I'm going to. It's a failure of the automated system that it thinks that she's going to. So let me answer that. In an apprenticeship, it is true that employers are under an obligation to enable their apprentices to put into practice what they've been doing at the course. Obviously, not straight away. We have an urban design module that is run by Procter and Matthews. It's enormously popular here. And we aren't expecting those apprentices to go back and design a new town the following week. So we know it's never been direct, but it certainly has been there in theory. Now, there are different ways in which you could be supported by your employers, other than financially, and no doubt we will come on to that. So the most obvious way is that some practices, in any case, allow some time for study leave, and that's the time that you would use in order to individualize, or some of the time that you use to individualize your work. But there's a deeper element of this, and one which we've found to be really valuable. And that is that when a student comes back from one of our residential sessions on the course, as it now is, and they show the office what it is that they've been doing, the people that you work with can then see what skills you now have that you didn't have before you went into the fortnight, right? So it's in everybody's interest that you do it. It's in your interest because you come across as a more versatile employee. You can demonstrate that you can do more things, and that's obviously going to be a good thing as far as your longer term trajectory with the employer is concerned. So that's important. By the way, you might mention to them that if they're going to sit and watch you redo your presentation from the crit at the end of the fortnightly session, that time qualifies as CPD for registered architects because it has learning outcomes, which is one of the conditions of CPD. So there is something in it for them in that respect. So how they support it is entirely up to them and up to you. We know that some people are more hands-on than others, but there isn't any longer a formalized requirement in the way that there was in the form of an apprenticeship. Now, Marina asks, what are the compulsory modules? Marina, all the modules are compulsory. That's fairly normal in a regulated course such as this, but that does mean that you still have some freedom to vary what it is that you're going to be, what it is that you're going to spend your time doing. Let me give you some examples of this. The first module in September 26, as I mentioned, is a research methods one, and I mentioned that we have a whole range of different types of research going on there. Well, you can always, at any point, pick up any area that interests you and come back to it when you individualize any of your subsequent projects. So, and in your final year, in the third year, although we provide a kind of skeleton brief in order to ensure that projects are comparable, other than that, everyone will be able to create their own brief for their own final project. So the final year has got a lot of freedom to take your research, your interests, your design capabilities exactly the direction where you are. Frederick asks a question, and after that, I'll go back to some of the ones we've been asked in advance, and asks about the interviews. Yes, the interviews will start as soon as the application date is over. That's the 28th of May. The interview, Frederick, it's a very straightforward conversation. We're interested in seeing, of course, like as you'd expect, right? There aren't any trick questions. I don't know what those of you might think about Cambridge interviews, but they're not full of trick questions for sure. Certainly at postgraduate level, you know exactly what you're going to be asked. Why do you want to come here? Can you show us that you have an interest in this? Do we have evidence that you can sustain an interest? How will you be able to apply this elsewhere? As with all architecture school interviews, at least half of it will be talking about your portfolio. So you can see that you can see that the portfolio is a very important part of the application. I'll say perhaps a little bit more about that in a moment. Frederick asks, are the offers made directly afterwards? Well, it happens like this, Frederick. The actual process of approval by all the required parts of the university is itself quite slow. But what we do as soon as we can after the interviews is we say whether we are recommending that you will be offered a place. That's how it works. We can't do better than that because the applications go to the colleges, for example, and it does take a while, perhaps compared to other places. But we will give you a realistic picture of what exactly happens. Anthony asks, how's the course assessed when the submissions take place? Like this. So as follows, Anthony, the first fortnight, the research methods one, you'll write an essay on a building. It could be any aspect of it, but they're usually the historical, the contextual aspects of a building. And you submit an essay in the middle, just past the middle of November. After that, however, you make a submission at the end of every fortnight. So the night before, day 9, at the end of day 9, you upload your project, your group project, and there is a crit on day 10, and you're then assessed. And then that project then goes into your portfolio. Now, I've been mentioning that people will individualize their projects after the residentials, and that means that you have a further opportunity to add material. So you're then adding extra work that you've done by the end of May every year. So that's how that works. It's always the end of the residential, with the exception of your first essay, which is slightly. Now, Erica asked a question about funding, and that, of course, is something that has come up. So let me answer that as clearly as I can. It's not let me say, actually, to be blunt, it's not as good a situation as we would like it to be. But let me explain how it's doable. It's doable with difficulty, but it is doable. First of all, if an employer is prepared to support to the same extent that they were supporting with an apprentice, they would be paying £6,000 a year towards the cost of the fees. So, in other words, half. Now, I do know that there are employers who are prepared to support applicants more than that, usually with some conditions, such as, for example, that you stay on with them for a couple of years afterwards. Those kind of things are fairly standard, actually, in part-time professional courses. So the first point is that we would expect it to be the case that for those working in architectural practices that do support, have supported apprentices in the past, that they would go on to support it to some extent. So that might bring you half of it. Let me just add to that. I'm always happy to speak to employers about why it's worth their while. This course is slightly cheaper for them than the apprenticeship was, so it's for various reasons. So there is that to be said for it. But our argument to employers has always been that somebody who takes our course is essentially upskilled at a very effective rate and can do much more and becomes a more versatile employee. And I'm always happy to talk to practices that are interested in this. So, Erica, if you have a potential employer who is thinking about it, then of course I'm very happy to do it. Now, you then mentioned the painful point, which is the government fees. As things currently stand, it's only possible to get a postgraduate loan for a total of 13,000, very slightly over 13,000. So that obviously only works out at about 4,000 or something like that. So it isn't enough to cover the whole thing. We think it's a mistake. We've been, along with every other architecture school, been lobbying the Architects Registration Board to try to deal with this problem. But that is currently the situation. But you can gather from what I'm saying that if you're able to take that loan and spread it across the 3 years, and if you're able to get support from your employer, that already brings you over 10,000 a year. Might mean that for most people, it's possible to find the rest. And don't forget, of course, you don't need a maintenance loan because you have a job, so you're not paying that. You're not adding to your student loan. But on your second point, third point, Erica, you're asking about how do you convince them? Well, I'm happy to convince them if you find you're not getting very far with it. I've done it plenty of times before. It works. Our apprentices come, they stay, they qualify, they stay. All kinds of things happen, of course, in life, but generally speaking, they stay with their employers as they make their way through the course. And that I think is one of the most important things. It's also one of the things that made it attractive to people who are doing it, people who are teaching it, and people in the offices who are supporting those who went to it. Now, JC asks about traditional architecture. So let me explain exactly the agreement we've come to with the King's Foundation. The King's Foundation was always watching our course with great interest because this has always been a non-dogmatic course and it has always been a sustainable architecture course. And our view is that traditional architecture is a form of sustainable architecture, and therefore we want to welcome people onto it who come from that background. How does it actually work? It works as follows. Everybody who chooses to join the traditional stream will be allocated a design supervisor. We call them academic advisors, a design supervisor who is sympathetic to what it is that they're trying to do. So, in other words, you're not going to come here and be deterred. You'll come here and be supported. Now, you'll find also that in the residential modules, most of the first week and sometimes into the second is essentially research. So that's applicable to anybody, whether they happen to work in a traditional practice or not. It doesn't make any difference. So what you do with it afterwards is up to you. If I can give an example from the module that Will has just completed, for example, there was a possibility, Will, wasn't there? I saw it in Alex's work of designing buildings with thatch. This is the module that is run by the natural materials team in the Department of Architecture. And it's exceptionally helpful to have that knowledge and that experience and that support if you're going into traditional architecture. So it's completely compatible, but the nuts and bolts of it is that you will be allocated a supervisor who wants to take on somebody in that way. Katharina asks, is it recommended to work in a practice? at the point of application. Katerina, because it's no longer an apprenticeship, it's no longer compulsory. If you are intending to become an architect at the end of it, you will need, certainly in the UK, to have worked in practice for at least 2 years. So it's worth bearing that in mind that you'll need those points to stack up, as it were. But we don't require anyone to work in practice, and and that might be relevant. Somebody might be between jobs, for example. They might be deciding what they want the focus of their work to be. So the answer is it recommended? Yes, it's probably going to help because you'll get more support at work, but it's not in any way a requirement. Now, Michael, I've answered some of that. Are there any options available to UK-based students? This is for costs, options for covering costs available to UK-based students outside of the Cambridge scholarships that you're aware of. In my opinion, they are exceptionally limited. Now, Vanessa and I have been looking at this, and I think in most cases the conditions are such that make it extremely difficult. There will be some people who are eligible, depending on, for example, their level their level of finances generally. I think, isn't that right? I mean, the hardship funds and so on. There are bits and pieces, but I think that what somebody should do is they should certainly go onto the University of Cambridge postgraduate funding website and look and see which of those options are available. Now, Michael, there's another point as well. There are some charitable organisations which provide bursaries and scholarships. It might take you a bit of time to find one that is suited to you and to your interests, but they certainly exist. And I can think of two examples, somebody who's currently with us, somebody who's intending to join us, where they have been offered a bursary which covers it. So I suppose you could say, as with all all part-time students, the situation is going to be a bit different, depending on who you are, what your interests are, what your background is, and so on. But there do seem to be some things out there. Keys, you've asked about the Keys Colleges ones. There is I think probably the answer is the Keys College website probably has that. Michael, Keys is looking for people who have very high, a very strong record of high academic achievement. They're not, their scholarships are applicable to anybody in any field. This is the first time that they've joined this. This is, as it were, a normal postgraduate course. You're not on a package holiday to a specific college in the way that you were in the apprenticeship. So Keys, have a look and see what they say, but they advertise them on their own website, and that will include the dates and so on. You've got the deadline on the page for the scholarship. It says the same as the course. That's all right. You can apply to that. You can always apply on the basis that if you got it, you take it. No, I think that's quite doable. Has an MST student ever received one? The answer is an MST student hasn't received one because the MST is new. You will be the first year of people doing this as a regular course. But have master architecture students generally? Yes, Keys does give them to architecture students and always has done. The person who founded the Department of Architecture was himself a Key student exactly, 100 years ago when it became the Faculty of Architecture. So yes, they have a long-term connection and they do it in principle. Now, I thought I would bring Maddie and Will in here because we have before returning to the questions on the question and answer, and that's a question about what the impact is on your time outside the university. Would either of you like to say a word about how you manage your time outside the residential fortnights? Maddie, you've turned your light on.
Yeah, I'm happy to share my thoughts. Um, yeah, working outside of practice, so working essentially full time, other than being on the 2-week residential courses, spending about a day and a half a month in addition to those outside. So setting your time apart away from the office, dedicating it to individualizing your portfolio after each residential seems to work quite well. You do tend to get used to managing your time quite efficiently, and just by nature of the course, you learn to work pretty proactively and quite efficiently. So it's also a good skill to learn for practice, which I've found to be quite useful. But yeah, generally it's doable. It can get a bit stressful towards the deadlines, but I think with architecture that's mostly
Normal.
expected anyway.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, we were trying. I just add to that, Maddie. We were trying, like everyone. I mean, this was tried when I was a part two student 100 years ago. They were also trying then to devise a system where there weren't these very hard deadlines. But to some extent, we have taken the sting out of it because although you do have a deadline, a create, feedback, a mark, and so on, you go on working on it afterwards as much as you want to, essentially. And if you don't want to, then you don't have to do much. But if you do want to, and some people do, then you can have another go at the project. You can do it differently. You can take it a different direction. Will.
Yeah, one thing that I would say is the 2 weeks that you do spend at uni puts you in quite a good position afterwards because the outputs are generally quite high, and the university is structured in a way to support you during those 2 weeks. So, they're quite in depth and quite intensive, but after your 2 weeks, you're sitting there in quite a comfortable position. Because you have, a wide range of work that you've produced. And as Tim just mentioned, you can kind of top up and build upon that foundation in quite a reasonable way after those 2 weeks, which is quite good.
Yeah, I mean, Ed, you also, to some extent, it's entirely up to you. As a postgraduate student at Cambridge, you are your own boss. And over the summer, and there isn't anything you necessarily have to do, but you might want to. The final stage of the whole thing, and this comes into the earlier question about assessment methods. At the end of the third year, everybody submits a portfolio of 60 pages of their greatest hits, which is usually mostly their final design project because that's completely independent. But of course, you can add other work to it, work that you've done since you were graded on the individual modules. People do that, and the external examiners do look at it, and they do reward exceptional cases where people have clearly gone on and done a whole lot more. Thank you, Will. Lainey asks, is there a way to get educational access to software? Yes, Lainey, the answer is there is. It's called being on the course. Now, the Rhino, yes, for sure. Revit, do you have, they're not provided with Revit, are you, Will and Mandy? I don't think so.
I think as a student, with your student email, you can sign up for a student educational license on Revit.
Ah, okay. So you can. The answer is yes. And Rhino, you can. And Grasshopper, you can. And anything else that you use? The Adobe Creative Cloud used to be available. Is that still the case?
It is still
I
available, yeah.
believe so, yeah.
Yes, it is. Okay, so the answer, Lenny, that's a simple answer. The answer is yes, is the answer to that. Now, Nicole asked a question about to have a postgraduate degree in architecture in Australia. If I were to apply for this course, says Nicole, would I be required to remain in the UK for the entirety of the course? No, you wouldn't. And that's why we understand that there is not a visa problem with it. You come and you stay for the fortnight and you go away again, and that is doable under what is the name of that kind of visa, Vanessa? It's a visitor, isn't it, or something like this?
Visitor visa, yeah.
Yeah, a visitor visa. So the answer is you do not have to stay here. Where you stay is going to depend on where you want to register as an architect, because the local regulator will make its own rules about how many years you need to have worked in a certain country. So if you wanted to qualify as an architect in the UK, then you would have to have worked here. We think for a couple of years. The Architects Registration Board has not fully clarified it. It's possible that they may reduce it actually, but basically you should be living in the place you want to qualify in eventually. So that answers, I think, your second question, Nicole. Would working in Australia while undertaking the degree count for hours towards registration? The answer is, I think it probably wouldn't necessarily, right? Again, you want to work in the country where you want to register. I know that those things are liberalizing. They change also from time to time. It's difficult to say what the relationship will between the Australian regulator and the ARB in 3 years' time. Those things do come and go. So it's always worth checking that end. But the basic rule is that you should work in the place where you want to qualify. The collaboration with the King's Foundation, Nicole, I've said a word about that. Essentially, you're allocated. There are two ways in which it works. The first is that you're having the same teaching as everybody else because most of the teaching is geared at the research, getting the basic information in order to work on the same as your on the design of your project, and that isn't going to vary whether you're going to do a traditional building or not. So that's the first part. The second part is that you would have you'd have a design supervisor, an academic advisor, who is supporting you in what it is that you want to do. So that's how that works. As I understand it, and I spoke to the architect John Simpson just before coming on this evening to have an update from John. The foundation intends over the coming years to expand the collaboration. That might include in the future, for example, that might include the possibility of bursaries. I think, Nicole, the foundation has some arrangement with students from Australia, which is probably easier for you to check than for me, which might conceivably involve some financial support at this point or later. But what we know is the foundation is looking quite carefully at who joins us and how it goes, and is intending to expand the level of connection between us. Now, there's a question a little bit further back, which I don't want to miss out. Eggsy asks, what are you looking for in a successful candidate? You have to be really highly motivated to work over the fortnight quite hard, as you've gathered from Madeline and from Will. So that's inevitably the case, and it's clearly different from a regular architecture full-time course, because in a regular architecture full-time course, you kind of slowly build up momentum over the course of the term, don't you? And then you have all the major crit at the end. Whereas in our case, you need to be able to work very well in a group. We provide formal teamwork teaching in the second module, that's to say in December of this year, from a team working specialist who has a background in architecture. So we teach you how to do it, but being able to collaborate with other people is enormously important. What we find is, there are a lot of benefits in working in small groups. One of them, of course, is simply you get a huge amount done. You get much more done than if you'd be doing it on your own. That's one reason. The second reason is that you're then also working with people who have a different experience of what it's like to work in practice. Will and Madeline come from different types of practice. And there are people who work for very large commercial practices. There are people who work for very small practices. It's a way in which you discover what being an architect is more like, because you can talk to them about what their experiences are like. So you need to be a good group worker. You need to be well organized enough to be able to work fairly insistently over those fortnights. And you need also, I think, to have an open mind about where the future might take you. Now, shall I have a look and see what other questions? Now, Eduardo asked about a research project. Now, should you fill in this section? The answer is you don't have to, Eduardo. That's a standard question because applicants to the full-time part 2 in the Department of Architecture requires them to submit a proposed research project. In our case, your third year would be your research project, and you've got plenty of time to think about it. So you don't have to fill it out, but you can certainly say what your interests are. Are we able to send you? Are you able to send us your contact details? Yes, absolutely. Perhaps Susanna could type it into the chat. The short version that no one gets wrong. TJB43 is always the best one. So that's that one. Izzy asks about the PDR one. We've actually taken that requirement out of the application at the moment. No, you don't need to. You don't need to submit the PDR one. Let me say something else about PDRs. First of all, you'd only need 2 years of it anyhow, so you wouldn't need 3, and you certainly wouldn't need any before you came. Secondly, the regulator is abolishing PEDRs, and it's replacing it with a practice record. And very unhelpfully to every architecture school in the country, they haven't actually yet said what it is they're replacing it with. But we all think that it'll be some kind of glorified PEDR. So although the system is changing, we recommend that people do them from the start, because the more evidence of what you've done, the better, the more useful it's going to be. We don't know, for example, whether the new version that replaces the PEDR will require more than 2 years. We don't know anything about this at all. So the answer is you should do it, but we do not require them to be signed off before you apply to us. That's fine. You definitely don't need it at this point. SketchUp says JC. Do you have SketchUp, Maddie and Will?
Yeah, I believe I have access to that
Yes.
through educational licenses. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So that's the answer to that. Yeah, there you go. Michael, thank you very much. You've given 2 details there. That's great. So yes, Keys does have a history of giving scholarships to architecture students, was the main point there. Does the individual tutor help with graphics and modeling problems? Well, they could do, but they're not. There are 2 types of tutor. One of them is the one who's standing around. I think that's not a very flattering way of putting it, is it? The one is the one who's in the room while you're doing the intensive fortnights. So there are people around then. Now, on that subject, let me give you a very good example relating to, and Maddie and Will can say if I'm misleading you here, but this has been my observation to date, is that because you work in groups, there's generally speaking somebody in the group who knows, for example, how Rhino works. So, and then it kind of spreads fast across everybody else in the group. You can learn, this is another advantage of working in a group, is you can pick up specific skills. It is the important thing to say here is that it has never been a problem in the 6 years in which we've been running. It's never been a problem for somebody who's come in with limited software skills. They've always been able to manage those what it is that they have to do. The tutors are around. There are other students in the same group are around. There are going to be ways of doing it. Can they help you outside that? Yes, probably. Most of them, the software packages that I was mentioning earlier, those ones are pretty general in the architectural profession. If you want to draw everything by hand, you can do that. You can do that as well. Michael Hurtley asks, he says, I'm an urban designer with a background in planning policy who works in a local authority. So my work is a mixture of design review on major applications. Would I need to develop projects independently of my day-to-day work? Yes, you would, Michael. Unlike an apprenticeship, it's not related. So you can do your, I don't know, of course, whether there are arrangements in your local authority for you to have study leave of some kind. We do have an apprentice in a local authority, in a county council, actually, who has managed to coordinate his learning with us with the sort of kind of official study leave. But no, they don't have to be connected. No, I mean, obviously, when it comes around to the urban design module, which takes place in December of the second year, so that'd be December 2027, then you're going to be in an exceptionally strong position compared to everybody else, and you may well find that you're helping other people in your group. But there's no disadvantage to it. Absolutely not. When the Architects Registration Board decided to remove the requirement to have a Part 1, they did it with people such as yourself in mind. They did it with people who were working, who for one reason or another had qualified in a different but a related field, and they couldn't qualify as architects without starting from day one and doing a Part 1 and then a Part 2. So this gets round that, and that was the intention of it. And I know that there are people who are applying or are thinking of applying with a variety of different disciplinary backgrounds. You are going to, as I would say, if I was interviewing a 17-year-old for a place on the regular architecture course, I would say you are going to have to show us that you're interested enough in buildings to be able to and to want to draw them from different angles and different ways and so on. You are going to need to do that because it's an architecture course. It's about designing buildings. So you're going to be able to show that you need it, but there's no disadvantage at all if the day job is separate. Now, having said that, Michael, in order to do the final bit to qualify as an architect, you would need to be working you would need to have some, you need to be working under the oversight of an architect. Now, this course does not include the final stage. Its official name is the Practice Outcomes Assessment. It will be a kind of simplified Part 3, for those of you who know the old language. And it will require evidence that you've been working under an architect for a period of time. We have in the local authorities that there are sometimes architects departments, and you could be sufficiently involved. You would probably be sufficiently involved in something if they were amenable to it, for you to be able to build up the experience of working a number of hours on an architectural task. So the short answer is, Michael, you don't have any problem at all with us. Where the problem would come would be in qualifying as an architect if you don't have experience of working directly on the design and the later stages of buildings. Now, the last question I have is from Sebastiano. Are there opportunities within the MST to develop our work into research outputs or publications? Yes, there are, but only informally, Sebastiano. So let me just say it's not a research master's. It isn't, for example, a route to a PhD. But that doesn't stop anybody from making the most of the research opportunities that you have here in order to develop your work as a researcher. That's all perfectly possible. As it happens, we have one person currently in the third year who did such a fantastic piece of work in his research methods historical study in his first year that he is developing it towards publication. So you can do it, and of course, as a graduate member of the university, you have access to all the research, all the online research facilities that the university can offer, and there are a lot of them. You log into the university library, and you can get at pretty much anything that has been published anywhere, and specifically in the UK, but certainly all the international research journals are there. So you have easy access to it. So although it is not a research degree, it being a member of it is going to make life easier for a researcher because you can get hold of what you need to get hold of in exactly the same way. Now then, I'm just going to just revert to the some of the questions that we had in advance. So let me see now. There are people. Some people have asked about their previous record. Does it matter, for example, that their degree was a long time ago? The answer is no, it doesn't, because again, this is what the regulator was trying to get at by changing the system. So there are people who were not very successful as students. I was one of them, so I speak about this with particular ease. And then an amount of time goes by, and you build up experience in different ways. You build up in some cases this will be academic experience. In some cases it will be practical experience. In some cases people are working in something related to architecture but not. Can you apply? Yes, you definitely can. What I would do is I would say in your application portfolio, about which more in a moment, I said I'd come back to that subject. I would explain a bit about what has happened. So you might want to mark up the drawings to say I did this in 2010, but I did this different type of work in 2020, and then we know exactly where you're coming from, and also to make it explicit in your application. So the answer to that is yes. We've been asked whether we're ARB and RIBA accredited. We are ARB accredited. We are in the process of converting it to the new system. Madeline will be one of those rare people who is the last person ever to do a part three. Will be the first person to not do a part three. That's assuming the change actually happens. So we are prescribed for the course as it currently stands. The course, and rather weirdly, for anyone joining us in September, it will change into the new version of the course at the beginning of your second year. It is an administrative nightmare, which is not your problem. Vanessa and I know about this very well, and that's any part of the horror. So it is. The short answer is yes. It's ARB prescribed. Now, is it RIBA validated? Well, not technically, because we've taken the word apprenticeship out, and the RIBA is saying this makes it a different course. Well, we might pick up that later, but I'm not particularly concerned about that I don't think it's an urgent thing. The RIBA validation is different from the ARB prescription. The ARB prescription is the thing that enables you to register as an architect in the UK, right? It's the important one. And if you register as an architect and you've got £500 a year to spare, you can join the RIBA, although I think you'll find fewer and fewer people are doing it, but nevertheless, you can. So it's not stopping you from being a member of the RIBA. RIBA validation is a different sort of thing. It's a judgment on the architecture school in general. So they look at things like the workshops, and the Department of Architecture has got a fantastic big new workshop. It looks at it looks more in detail at who is teaching, what they're teaching, what the subjects are that come up. It's much more subjective, and it's much more about the Department of Architecture as a whole than it is about individual courses. So we're not in a great rush to do it. Everything else at that happens in the Department of Architecture is validated. The identical course to this one, the one that Maddie and Will are currently on, is validated. From next year, it won't, only because the word has been taken out. We don't see this as being a particular problem. We will deal with it as it comes up, but it's not the thing that you need in order to qualify as an architect. So that was that. Now then, where were we? What was I about to talk about? Has anybody? No, I was going through these, wasn't I? That's right. Now, let's have a look now. We have had applicants from other countries. We have just now from Nicole in Australia. I mentioned there that that the arrangements, the agreements between the regulators of the countries do change from time to time. So I would advise anybody from outside the UK to check with their local regulator whether the ARB prescription, that's their technical word for it, the ARB accreditation is recognized in their own country. Okay. I mean, I think it's difficult for us to follow that all the way along. But if you come from a country outside the UK, then obviously you have a vested interest in seeing whether that is the case. Now then, do you have any other ones? Spoken a bit about the fees. We do know that the course is not eligible for either the Gates Scholarship or the Commonwealth Scholarship. And well, the reasons for that, I think, are the fact that the universities themselves, who are part of schemes like this, have to make arrangements for entire courses. So, in other words, they aren't individual applications; they are kind of agreements between the university, and we're not at that stage yet. Now, I'm just looking at the questions we've been asked in advance, and I think we've probably covered all those areas. Let me just go back to the Q&A little box, which has just closed or reopened. Do I expect the MST architecture to have a similar reputation as the new M-Arch? Well, that's a big question, isn't it, Jan? It's very hard to compare them because the people going into the M-Arch are people who they're 18 when they come in. So it's not going to be the same thing as a course which is composed of people who are already mostly working as professionals, either directly or directly related to architecture. So it's difficult to compare them. What you can do, of course, is you can go to the exhibition that will be held over the summer to decide for yourself. So there will be an exhibition in London of last year's third years in architecture. And what I'm just quickly going to do here is check the date. I think it's the 25th to the 28th of June, but it's worth checking this right away since you are there. And then you can decide what you think. So let me have a look. It is indeed the 25th to the 28th of June. And if you keep an eye on the announcements from the Department of Architecture and from Pace Marketing, we will give the exact location of it. It's a gallery. It's a gallery inside an architect's office, I think, in East London. So then you can decide for yourself. The 4-year, we think that the 4-year M-Arch is something that will probably catch on quite simply because who wants a loan for 5 years when they could have one for 4, quite to put it bluntly. So we think there's going to be more of that. At the moment, there isn't. And I think that Cambridge is the only place offering the 4-year course. They do a kind of accelerated part 2, essentially. They do a sort of high intensity all year long part 2 in their 4th year, whereas our one, of course, you're combining it with your work. So it's a different sort of thing. Can you stay in the colleges free of charge? You'll soon discover that colleges don't do anything free of charge, I fear. But what you can generally do is you can generally book rooms during the vacations if they are available. They're not always available. They sometimes are. So it's worth trying. Cambridge is unusual because students don't pay they aren't here outside term time. So they don't pay rent outside term time, which means they get thrown out of their rooms, which means that the colleges have got available rooms, but of course they use them quite often for conferences and for other things. So one thing that might be quite sensible to do is to contact the college that you were applying to and to ask them whether this is ever possible. I mean, in our experience, it generally has been, but people don't seem to do it very often, actually. In practice, they don't ever particularly seem to need to. So the answer is you need to check each time. It's always important to remember in this university that the colleges are separate kingdoms from the teaching part of the university. So we don't have any say over what they do, and they don't have any say over what we do. But they go into this, particularly the colleges that have developed strong postgraduate support, they go into it with a lot of goodwill. And the thing to do is to contact them direct. Marina says publications and writing samples are taken into account during the application process. Well, to some extent, Marina, I mean, only as part of a kind of general picture of who you are and what you've been doing. It's not a condition that you submit the published work. Many people who come straight out of a part 1, after all, won't be in that position. And we will notice when we look at the module transcripts, whether somebody has consistently done very well in written modules in dissertations, for example. But it isn't a requirement. And again, you asked, do you have to have a minimum number of years professional experience? No, you don't. You could come straight out of a part one and straight into this for sure. And quite a few people do. Even apprentices, actually, some apprentices have gone straight into part two without even an interval. Now, Griffin says, am I correct in understanding that work we're doing in professional practice can be used as case studies for the work we do in modules one and two? No, I don't know why you would think that necessarily, but what you can do, Griffin, is you kind of hinted at this in the bit you've added at the end in brackets. You put in brackets, i.e., during the personalization stage. Yeah, at that point, you can add what you want. But what you need to remember is that unlike an apprenticeship, what you do in your office is not part of the course. So it would only be kind of supplementary rather than actually part of the course. I don't think that there is a technical or a kind of regulatory problem with that, because what the ARB is also looking at is at your work that you submit when you're on the course. But generally speaking, it's not going to be enormously relevant because the particular nature of those projects. Now, Ezgi asked, what does the application process include? Vanessa, would you like to say a word about the application process?
Yes, of course. There's information on our website. You will submit your application, which will then be reviewed and shortlisted, and you will be invited for, if you're successful, you will be invited for an interview. Following the interview, we will let you know as soon as possible. As Tim mentioned earlier, we have to go through various committees to get the approval for the applicants we would like to admit. And we will let you know as soon as we can that an offer will be made. And yes, that's pretty much it. Anything else that we want to add, Tim or Susanna?
No, I think that I'm looking at a few other comments. And Jan asked about the I mean, we have had applicants from people who've got second and third degrees already, right? Now, that it sounds unfamiliar, I think, to many people, but it is the intention of the Architects Registration Board that people who should be architects can be architects. So it doesn't really that much matter. I mean, I've certainly seen applicants who've already who already have postgraduate degrees. None of those things are a problem, and they will, for some people, be a distinct advantage. I think, in the bottom line, it is, although the range and the scope of it has been increased so much, the bottom line of the whole thing is it is aimed at people who want to become architects, and that is the thing that you need to show that you want to do in one way or another. And I say that also because I think to some extent you need that kind of motivation of really wanting to be an architect in order to make the most of an architecture course, in order to enjoy it, in order to remember why you're doing it when things are at their most intensive. It's because you want to be the architect who takes responsibility for buildings. So bear that I would say as a general line to anybody applying. And when you write your statement, when we ask you in your interview what your longer term plans are, it is primarily aimed at people who do want to work as architects. Now, I think we might actually, Michael's helpful answers there about keys are still up on the screen. That's great. I could ask a question to Vanessa and Susanna, as a matter of fact, as they're both here. Now, we do have applicants, and I know that one of them is with us at the moment, who were previously a member of another college. There isn't any particular reason why they shouldn't return to that college if that college will have them, is there? But I don't know how it works with the hard wiring of the application process.
As long as the college will have them, that we can make that happen. Yes,
yes, that's right. I mean, what's your file?
Need to talk to the existing college.
That's what I thought was the case. Now, let me say a couple of words about that. We've had arrangement with Homerton for a long time. Keys is new to this, but we did originally have an arrangement with Queen's College, as a matter of fact. Now, this has moved, as you conceive, to being a regular part-time university course. So the college is, as it were, none of our business. But what I can say is this. Most people will probably be in Homerton, and traditionally, even ones such as Maddie, in fact, who've been at other colleges before, they quite like the fact that they're all together over the fortnight. And Hompton also is to a large extent a graduate college, so it does more kind of graduate-y things. But that's it. I mean, if you happen to be at a college in the centre of town and you happen to prefer their lunch, which is nearer anyway, then there isn't any reason why you shouldn't apply to them. I don't know. There is how does it work on the application process? Is there a drop down, or can you say it somewhere else?
They can contact us and they can contact us directly. They have an
Right.
association with a link with another college, and then we can look into contacting the college and
Yeah.
help them with that.
Yeah, that's good.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Well, generally the colleges do take them back. Do take back returning people in my experience. So I think that's probably.
Could we
Yeah.
ask Maddie and Will to talk about their experience of being in college, perhaps?
Yes. Why don't you say a word about that? That's a good idea.
Yeah, I can start. Yeah, really enjoyed the course so far. I'm in my second year, so the 2 years so far have been really great. I think being in a college together, as Tim just mentioned, has been very nice because you can get to know everyone in your course a lot better and a lot quicker. I think that there's more opportunities for socializing in that college environment. So dinners together, formals together. So you're still getting the Cambridge experience and having the formal dinners on regular occasions, and with other postgraduate students, which you can also connect with around college. I think working with other people from other practices as well, or people with different experiences, was mentioned earlier today, is always exciting and is probably one of like my highlights, because you can learn so much from other people that are in your groups throughout the residentials. So just in 2 weeks you learn so much from the other people that will be in your group, and you can either take it to springboard off in your own portfolio or take it back to practice or then use it in your future work. So that's another exciting part of the course.
Good, great. Well, I think we've kept everyone for a whole hour now. Will, do you want to say a last word? I see you've just switched your microphone back on, so let me have the last word in this session.
Oh, well, the large responsibility. Okay. I would only echo what Maddie was saying, and it's really refreshing, jumping into those 2 weeks with such intensive group work, because you really do feel like you're surrounded by a group with kind of a wide range of skills, which just facilitates you learning off of each other in such a collaborative way. And I think just being surrounded with your peers and them being of such high caliber, you can really bounce off of each other in a way that I don't think is as easy on other courses, perhaps. And I think that is just reinforced by, being in the colleges and kind of having their support as well. So.
That's lovely. Well, thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, I should say goodbye to everyone. Thank you all very much indeed for coming, for your questions. You have my email address. If you happen to lose it, you can find me easily on both the PACE website and the Department of Architecture one. And of course, I'd always welcome any inquiry. And as I was stressing earlier, always happy to speak directly to architectural practices. Good. Thank you very much, Sam. Say goodbye.